Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and we welcome you to another important episode of The New World Next Week. Of course, everything you need, audio, video, and all the sources cited are at NewWorldNextWeek.com. James, we'll get to the story that pretty much everyone in the world is chattering about as we speak in our second story. But first, let's get to one that is not getting very much coverage and one that's fascinating. Osama bin Laden's son-in-law's trial begins in New York City. We'll grab this from ABC. Osama bin Laden's son-in-law went on trial Wednesday, March 5th, in federal court in Manhattan, where jurors heard him portrayed as both a murderous mouthpiece for al-Qaeda and as a target of prosecution designed to play on the fears and resentments from 9/11. In opening statements, the prosecution referenced the 9/11 attack several times in his opening, even though our guy was not involved in the plot. His defense said, quote, "This is not Osama bin Laden. This is Suleiman Abu Ghaith, a Muslim, an Arab from Kuwait, a husband, a father, an imam, a talker, an ideologue." Suleiman Abu Ghaith, age 48, a one-time imam at a Kuwaiti mosque, was brought to New York from Turkey last year. He pleaded not guilty. He has pleaded not guilty to charges he conspired to kill Americans after the September 11th attacks. Born in Kuwait, he is married to Osama bin Laden's eldest daughter, Fatima. And James, this story goes on, and it seems as though this is connected to not one, but two of the feared shoe bomber cases. And again, his lawyer, his defense notes at the end of the day, there's really no evidence. There's the substitution for evidence with fright and alarm. And James, the related story, I don't know if you want to comment before I get into the exclusive story from the Washington Times.
Actually, I do. Let's just cover the Abu Ghaith side of this first, because, substitution of evidence for fright and alarm is pretty much the hallmark of the war on terror. But it's a fascinating story for a lot of different reasons, one of which is just the way that he was eventually captured and apprehended, which a lot of the news is kind of eliding over that and saying just that he got arrested in Turkey and then sent to Jordan and then the U.S. But in fact, as Sibel Edmonds and I covered in our Gladio B series, I believe in part 2 of that series, we talked briefly about this at the time, because Abu Ghaith had just been arrested in Ankara in Turkey at a luxury hotel downtown Ankara, just a block or two away from the government offices. And there he was. He gets arrested at that time because the U.S. government asked for that, and then immediately released because he had committed no crime in Turkey. And then they decided to deport him to Kuwait. And on the way to Kuwait, he gets stopped in Jordan, which is one of the known CIA collaborators in the rendition program, and then taken to the U.S. So it was kind of a circuitous route. And once again, it shows that the Turkish government seems to be, having these people show up at their doorstep and then letting them go. So what does that say about what this fictional war on terror is really about and who's really on what side? I guess the real question here is then, why is the U.S. trying to put him on trial now? And the only answer that I can think of is that his value as a mouthpiece for the fictional al-Qaeda boogeyman has slipped below his value as a propaganda piece for the war on terror by putting him on trial. Although it should be an interesting trial. From what I understand, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, is expected to have testimony admitted into this case. So it'll be very interesting to see how this turns out. But the charge is conspiracy to kill Americans, and even the prosecutors admit he had no operational role in the fictional 9/11 al-Qaeda narrative, etc., etc. So I have no idea what they're going to say about him. But anyway, it should be interesting to find out.
James, the related to this story that we'll include is an exclusive from the Washington Times. FBI had human source in contact with Osama bin Laden since 1993. In a revelation missing from the official investigations of 9/11, the FBI placed a human source in direct contact with Osama bin Laden in 1993 and ascertained that the al-Qaeda leader was looking to finance terror attacks in the United States. This according to court testimony in a little-noticed employment dispute case. This testimony, James, was given in 2010 to an essentially empty courtroom, so thus it escaped the notice from the media or terror specialists. The Washington Times was recently alerted to the existence of the testimony while working on a broader report about al-Qaeda's origins. Now, it remains to be seen, James, whether the conclusion the Washington Times will come to about al-Qaeda's origins is that, as you have noted and so many others have, that they don't exist. We'll have to wait on that one. But this is a huge story from the Washington Times and physically huge. Make sure when you go to this source, you click the view full article because it goes over at least 5 pages to get into this story. And we'll also include a link to 911blogger.com that further gets into this story and breaks down all the other points where the U.S. and its allies had contact with bin Laden and the hijackers many, many times before 9/11. James, I would just say it seems like all of the chaos and showbiz razzmatazz of 9/11 is now just sort of playing out and being wrapped up in courtrooms as if it were any other just sort of case between international bodies that are just sort of settling some loose ends.
That's right. And of course, this also ties into the decision last December to allow families to sue the Saudi government for potential involvement in 9/11, which is, again, it's an interesting thing that's been blocked for over a decade. And now all of the floodgates are being opened on that because apparently Saudi Arabia is in the crosshairs of the U.S. diplomatic community for whatever reason. So, again, it is just a geopolitical power play that's playing out in the courts now. And that's the way that the 9/11 ends, not with a bang, but a whimper in the courtroom, I guess.
James, let's now get to the story that pretty much everyone is chattering about. It's been on the front page of Google News pretty much all day, tens of thousands of mentions. Everybody is talking about the story of the American anchor for Russia Today resigning on air over the invasion of Ukraine. Liz Wahl, W-A-H-L, an American anchor of the Kremlin-funded Russia Today news network, resigned on air Wednesday in protest over Russia's invasion of southern Ukraine, the second American reporter to publicly condemn the Russian government's actions on its own channel. Wahl, who works in the media outlet's Washington, D.C. bureau, claimed she could no longer be, quote, part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning, end quote. She was the second. The first, of course, was the much more well-known host of Breaking the Set, Abby Martin. She went off on corporate media propaganda during an interview, James, with Piers Morgan on CNN. While two RT anchors, I'm grabbing this from Mediaite. So again, as if we shouldn't have to say this, but linking does not equal endorsement. A lot of times will give you different links to sources that I don't necessarily salute, but are worthwhile in showing you the various angles. While two RT anchors spoke out against network editorial policy this week, one of them stayed at their jobs, and Abby Martin joined Piers Morgan on CNN about self-censorship, corporate media, and all of these things. James, it's fascinating also to note Piers Morgan's show has also been canceled and will be done in a few weeks. And this all really plays into who do you get your news from, James?
Yes, it certainly does, in a spectacular fashion. Well, on the Liz Wahl side of this story, if her on-air resignation was a kind of cover letter for her job application to Fox News, then I will throw in a link to a Daily Beast article where she explains why she resigned that I think is the job application itself. And for people who are interested in Liz Wahl and her views, I think you can find them in that article where she's basically defending American imperialism and saying, oh, it's we weren't allowed to report on these things, etc. etc. And so I would not be surprised if she ends up working at some mainstream corporate garbage outlet in the United States anyway. So I'm not really concerned about her. And I'll also throw in RT's response to Liz Wahl's resignation, which I thought was actually a very good response. It puts it in a nutshell, I think, quite well, that if there are genuine concerns about editorial policy, etc., there are professional ways to quit, and this is self-evidently an attention-seeking way to quit. So I think that's probably a good enough assessment of the Liz Wahl situation. For Abby Martin, well, I mean, there's a lot to say there, an awful lot, and in fact, I'm probably tomorrow, Friday, I'm going to be putting out a regular edition of my podcast talking about this subject and some of the subjects that it raises. I know I promised the Federal Reserve documentary, but we've been waiting 100 years for the truth about the Federal Reserve, so I'm sure we can wait a few more days. This ties into what's happening right now, the battle lines that are shaping up in the future possible World War III type scenario. And I think this is extremely important that we think about this very carefully, because it really does go to the heart of what this all means, what hypocrisy on international democracy, international diplomacy means, how we navigate that, independence of journalism, etc. So it's exceptionally important for us to take a stance on this